Thank you. Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure, and anyone that knows me knows that I love to talk about midwifery. So I can't say thank you enough. And of course, for this week, which is incredibly special, the celebration of International Day of the Midwife, which I always think is our chance to shout and to be heard about the work that we do and the good things that midwives can put really in their pocket and take all the plaudits and all of the well wishes that we deserve. And I still count myself as a midwife, even though I'm in retirement from clinical work. So I had to think about how I would talk to you this evening, and I had a flick back over the many presentations that I've done over the years. And this one called to me, and I'd done it for some student midwives who wanted to know what it was like to be a midwife, because they were very much on the cusp of registration, and how to overcome some of those difficult days and feelings, and not just that, some of the people that we will meet along our career pathway. So in the past, and I remember as a very small group of the very first Consultant Midwives Forum, that we talked about how we'd got to be where we were, which was taking on the role of Consultant Midwife back in 2002, 2003, and what it felt like. And I'd have to say it was pretty hostile at the start. 1 second. Is that moving? Yes, it looks like it. 1 second. Has that moved? Yes, right. Sorry about that. So I was thinking, probably all of you out there would have heard about the tall poppy phenomena, and I hadn't really looked into where it came from and why people alluded to tall poppies. So you probably know that poppies are associated anyway with the ravages of war, but the very first time that poppies appeared as a symbol of death and war was many centuries ago, which was around about the 12th century, when Genghis Khan was rampaging over the east. But more of us, I think, associate it with World War One and the fields in France where poppies just flooded every springtime and showed, if you like, a metaphoric symbol of how lives were lost but still remembered. So where did the tall poppy come in? Well, I remember driving back from a Consultant Midwives Forum, and there were about 12 of us at the time in Leeds, and there was a field on the side of the motorway that was absolutely covered with poppies, and the next field was splattered with a few poppies, and the next field I saw just a few less. And that made me think about this. So when I got home, I looked up the tall poppy syndrome, and it came from a piece of work that was done in Canada. And it was done because of the difficulties that women were finding about how they progress through the workplace. Many of those women at the time, and this is 2018, believe it or not, I really struggle to think that we've come so little in terms of equality. But these women said that they felt that they'd been left out, ignored, silenced, despite them speaking out. And even though other women agreed with what they said, there were only a few that stood up and raised their voices. And that's where the issues around tall poppies comes in. It's almost like, yes, there are lots and lots of poppies, but actually the tall poppy standing on its own becomes the mouthpiece for the others. So that's where this came in. And I, you know, I think it has a great analogy there. So where are we at the moment? I don't want to talk about doom and gloom. That's not what I do. But I do want to take stock, if you like. And because I now don't work in the NHS, I have to work really hard to keep up with all the publications. And I have to work really hard to read things that, as you get older, become a little bit more difficult. And I'm not good at reading on the computer, so I have to print off things and I sit and read them. So these are two pieces of my reading over the last, well, probably year. And these two bits stuck out for me. The CQC, as we all know in healthcare, they do assessments and reports around the quality of care and how it's delivered within our NHS services. And their report in 21-22 really raised the issues about ongoing inequalities in maternity services, as well as training issues, culture. They put poor culture there, but in other places in the document, it's called toxic culture, and around risk assessments that aren't either done effectively or are absent. The other thing that I happened to read, and again, I didn't print it all off, was in the last 2017-19 publication of the maternal death rate and some of the issues around that. And Oxford recently published the 20-22 assessment of maternal death rates, and they actually found that those deaths had gone up, which didn't surprise me because my first thought was, oh, well, it was COVID. But actually, they aggregated for COVID and they took those deaths out. So there is a significant rise in maternal deaths. And that was quite stark, I thought. And then recently there was a paper presented to the House of Lords, and I would urge you to have a look on their publication list on Hansard, because there are some really interesting conversations that are had. And there was a very long but also full discussion around the performance of maternity services in England in particular. So I listened to that, actually. You can, because they're all recorded. So that was something that I found that, again, they were aware of all of the things that we know, and hope that are being dealt with. Then, this is an old paper that I had read many years ago, as you can see, 2003. So this was when I just become a consultant midwife, and there was a select committee reading on Health Fourth Report, and this was around the safe staffing structure of maternity care. Now, this was, again, documented in Hansard, and you can find this paper if you wish. But what they said was the RCM had reported at the time, in 2002, they had 33,165 midwives in practice in England. Of those, more than 20% were over the age of 50. However, if you go onto that particular record, what they said is that in 1994, and again, I was a midwife then, that we actually had 35,000 midwives. So you could see that in, what's that, 8 years, over 2,000 midwives had left the profession. So that was showing a trend that I think was surprising. And they were asking the questions, well, why? So it was a mixed bag at the time, but I don't know whether you remember Professor Mavis Kirkham. She did a piece of work and did a report on why midwives leave. And in that report, she said one of the main issues was that they weren't working as they had trained to work, which was as a midwife, making independent decisions for women and advocating for them. So one of the recommendations from the House of Lords was that if women and midwives worked on a model of continuity of care, then that would be a welcome thing that women wanted, but also it would promote midwives, working as midwives and practicing in innovative ways. So continuity of care, etc. Also, they recommended that depleted midwifery establishment and closure of maternity units are not conducive to midwives coming back into the profession. There was a question around, well, what can we do to find out why people are leaving, but also to encourage them to either come back or to stay? And they looked at the models of training, and one of the models of training that has more or less all but disappeared is the registered nurse coming back to do her midwifery, which was a shortened course, and most of those courses were withdrawn. So that was another issue about the range of access to training as a midwife. And of course, now we're in a position where it's really, really affecting midwives staying in the profession, continuing to work as they believe they should be working, but also encouraging newly qualified midwives, which we know were one of the most vulnerable groups to fall away from midwifery within the first couple of years. And this is where I think fear and recrimination and the culture of not having the resilience, and I hate that reference point, that someone isn't resilient to stay in a profession where they don't have access to a break or they can't make it out to the toilet. So fear and recrimination. what I also think is we have had plethora of report, and if you, like I said, if you go on to any of the government and the NHS and NHS England websites, you'll see those reports. I also know that many midwives are afraid to speak up and speak out, because if they do, the media picks it up and report it in a way that negatively represents midwives. And there's something around we're expected to tolerate the intolerable. Now, I've just been listening. I'm a great audiobook listen when I'm doing my sewing. Many of you know that I love my time at my sewing machine, and I've just been listening to a book called Women, and this is the story of the nurses who went to the Vietnam War. There were 600 of those nurses, and although it took a long time for the US government to recognize the veterans that came back from Vietnam, the women were never remembered or referred to. And that was the story around how those women finally got recognition for what they contributed into, succeeded in the war. But not only that, in those young men who either were blown to pieces or were brought to the camp where they were assessed and triaged and bandaged up. It was the job of those nurses to do that. But I also know that seeing bad things happen affects you. And there is this belief that there's nothing we can do about it. We just have to accept the status quo. So midwives are speaking out, and I would like to think that I'm one of them. There are lots of midwives on Instagram, and I do follow quite a few, and I do see them really positively promoting midwifery. This is one of the midwives, and I'm really involved with Ginny. She's an Irish midwife who has now set up in the Irish Republic the equivalent of birthrights that we have here in the UK. We think our system here is okay and good enough, but actually, and I've been across to Ireland and I've seen how the service works there, and midwives there are not allowed to work in a midwifery way. And Janine is one of those brave midwives who speaks up and speaks out. I just wanted to kind of put a few thoughts out there. And I want to say this, and I make no apologies for saying that, around normal birth, because there is a huge black hole, if you like, that normal birth has entered into. And I want to say it as it is. Now, I know the RCM did a huge piece of research on finding out what women preferred to call birth. And there's all sorts of names that it can be called: physiological birth, natural birth. But you know, I grew up calling birth normal, and where birth didn't go along a normal trajectory, it told me then that there was other things that needed to happen. So I'm not apologizing for making this clear on my slide, but I think history will always show us where we've made mistakes, and letting the woman state her preferences will then give us guidance to what her birth she prefers to call it. I think that we have had a show of senior leadership that has failed to address some of the issues. And I do still think that our midwife leaders have to be accountable and have to stand up as the tall poppies sometimes, because for too long midwives have either been knowingly blamed or inferred that they are the reason why something happened. And I will say that if you go back through the history of the NHS, health and well-being of mothers and their babies has never really featured highly. It's been the poor or the Cinderella of all services, and therefore financial recompense for maternity has never been addressed properly. I think we've had opinions from people who think that they understand midwifery and understand maternity. And that has informed debate and discussion. However, if you look globally, and remembering this is International Day of the Midwife, we are at a tipping point, I believe, in our profession, and it is really now up to us to encourage, promote, and really take our profession into the next generation. Otherwise, those who suffer will be the countries that have poor resources or no resources, and it will be because we have not taken care of our vital resources to look after midwifery in this country. So what next? We need to stand together, and I'm absolutely committed to this, that even though I'm not in the NHS now, I still feel that it's up to me to say what I believe about midwifery and to stand with those midwives who are working within the profession. We need to speak out. So if you are and have a burning desire around something that doesn't look right, doesn't feel right, speak out. Amanda Burley, who some of you may know, is an ex-midwife who has written a publication around bullying within our profession and our service, maternity services. And she recently presented that publication to the House of Lords, and she will be going back in a while to meet with them again to have another discussion. So sometimes you have to reach high, and I've supported Amanda, and I will continue to do that because she has been through a great deal, but has still stood up for what she believes in. Silence is not golden, and I've done a presentation on here before around that, so I'm not going to elaborate too much, but to keep something to yourself, it manifests. And if it manifests, it dictates how you feel and how you work. So I don't believe keeping silent is a healthy thing to do. And I think we have to stand up for our profession. Many of the midwives out there have done 3 hard years to qualify at a cost to them, not just financially, but to their families. So if we don't stand up for that, then all of that time, all of that money is lost. Look at these lovely midwives here. These are the Yorkshire midwives that the TV did a wonderful programme around their home birth service. And so they believed in birth, believed in the team that they created, and believed in the women. And then when you saw the impact of that with the women and their families, it reached out to you from what you saw in front of you. They were within their own little network of a team. They were caring and sharing and lifting people up, giving others the chance to step off if they needed to. That's what good midwifery is. There's a dear friend of mine, Jackie, became a consultant midwife just after me, and I don't probably need to tell you where she is today. She is the chief midwife for the International Confederation of Midwives, and her impact and her reach is phenomenal. She has her arm there around Princess Catherine, and I know that she provided care for her. So birth, it really brings us right down to humanity, about who we are and standing together, owning our future and owning what is ours. We are midwives. We are by law the person who should be at the birth. No one else has that written into their mandate. So celebrate who we are. And I remember seeing Kate running across, I think they were in the Royal College of Obstetricians. Yes, we were. And Kate ran across to her and put her arms around her. That's what midwives do. We are never, ever forgotten. So one of the things I've always told myself that I must be and I must do is to advocate for women, whatever birth they wanted, even if they declined the whole system, I would still be there to offer something, to listen, and to be that voice for them. And I think that's a really important element of midwifery. Yeah, go the extra mile, but I never found that hard to do, because the women gave me much more back. And I put something on, I think it was Facebook, and many of the women that I used to be their midwife follow me on there. And I had some fantastic messages from those women and their families on what it meant to them to be part of this very, very precious relationship that we have with women. And one of them said, you know that you are an important part of our family to me. And I just thought it was 30 years ago when I was with her at the birth of her second child. And that's the words that she gave me. I thought that was so beautiful. Sometimes midwifery is hard. Sometimes it's terribly, terribly sad. And sometimes it's tragically traumatic. We have to state that, and we have to, yes, be there for the families that we care for, even when they walk home without their babies, but also for our colleagues when they are bearing the brunt of that and can't actually move forward. All we need to do is to mother them just as we've mothered that family. Take time for yourself. And Sue said something about this right at the start, and I think it's important. If you don't nourish yourself, you can't give to others. So to me, that's one of the most important things that you can do. Be a good memory for that family. I remember when I first went to Sandwell and West Birmingham, and I set up the project to develop Serenity Birth Centre, and I called that project Your Birth in Our Home. And that really changed the way that midwives and obstetricians and anyone else that was working with us thinking about birth. Because when the culture becomes toxic, you are almost automated, not just in your moving, but in your thinking. And so the compassionate, empathic way that we work becomes robotic. And none of that is a good memory for families. Be a warrior for women and for womanhood. Looking at that baby when she's just given birth, it almost like pumps you up full of that oxytocin, full of the wonderful sense of achievement that woman has just overcome. So standing up for women, advocating them, but being a warrior sometimes, it's okay. That doesn't mean that all of us choose to work in a birth centre, a home birth team, a continuity model. All our skills are vital because we don't know when we need to reach out and accept help from other healthcare professionals. We know we work closely with obstetricians. We also work closely with anaesthetists. We also work closely with neonatologists. But there are a raft of other people that we need to be able to pull in so that we advocate for that woman. So I'm nearly at the end of my chat here, but my inspiration was Rosa Parks, amongst one of my inspired women. And she, as many of you will probably know, was known as the mother of the civil rights movement because of her action when there was the bus boycott in Montgomery. What happened was there were hardly any buses taking people to work, and she needed to work to provide for her children. And she got on a bus, and there were all white people at the front of the bus, and there were no seats at the back where black women or men were to sit. So she just in that moment thought, this has to stop now. So she sat down on that seat where a white person should have sat. And these are just some of the words which I think are really inspiring. Have you ever been hurt and the place tries to heal a bit and you just pull the scar off it, you pick it off over and over again? I knew someone had to take that first step, and I made up my mind not to move off that seat. I've learned over the years that when your mind is made up, this actually diminishes your fear because you know what must be done to deal with the fear. And she wanted to be remembered as a person who wanted to be free so other people could be free. This is a very, I did this talk to student midwives, so it's a very quick story here, but my first role as consultant midwife was with an alongside birth centre in a hospital where delivery suite, you turned right through the door, the birth centre, you turned left. So you were literally on the same corridor, but the end of the birth centre was theatres for the sections, for the emergencies. And it was like a motorway. And one particular day we had 5 rooms, and our midwives were in those rooms with our women, delivering them of one-to-one care with a midwife, and they were doing fantastic. But I saw them going in and out of each other's rooms, and I said, what on earth are you doing? And they said, we've only got one sonic aid. This was between all the 5 rooms. So I thought, this is unacceptable. So I rang the head of midwifery, and I said to her, I'm closing the birth centre as of now because we don't have equipment that's sufficient to run this place safely. So you can imagine, she came running over to me, and she said, what's going on? You can't close the birth centre. And I said, if there was on delivery suite a lack of CTG monitors for women, then the obstetricians would close it now. I said, and there's no difference here. If a midwife needs a sonicate with a mother in her labour and we're having to run in and out of rooms, that is unsafe. So all I need to say is within 3 hours, every single room had a sonicate. So I'm going to end by saying you are tall poppies. You might not think you are, but you are. I was, and I was frightened to speak out, and I was sometimes really angry with myself because I didn't speak out when I should have done. But you know what was more important was I cared about being a good midwife, and I cared what the women thought of me. I cared less what my colleagues thought of me, and that's a bit lonely sometimes. But I have done jobs where I felt that I could do better, and I know all of you out there will have felt that. So I know that pain, and I know what being criticised feels like. But to get a message from 30 years ago for the care that I've given, to say I'm part of that family, means more to me than anything I can say. So I'm asking you tonight, and as we celebrate midwives this week, to stand together, not just in this country, but across the world, because we know that midwives save lives and women need us, whether they think they do or not. But I want to say to you, that is what being a midwife is. Being a good enough midwife is listening to what our women are asking of us. So I'll leave it there.